Hi, everybody. This is What is the Constitution by Patricia Brennan Demuth. We're now going to read the chapter Small versus Big. This is Lesson 7, Part 2. So if you have a copy of the book, you might want to have it in front of you so you can make notes in it if you want. And please make sure your brain is plugged in and you're paying attention and not distracted by other things. So let's take it away. So we're going to be reading the chapter. And the idea is we're going to employ a number of different reading strategies. In particular, an important one we want to focus on is that when we run into something that maybe doesn't quite make sense, I want to back up and reread it. And then in this case, we don't have a question in front of us. The chapter heading is not a question. And so if there are no questions, change the chapter title into a question. So small versus big. So I could come up with all kinds of questions. What's the small thing? What's the big thing? I'm going to just ask generally, so what does small versus big mean? Why is that the name of the chapter? Must be important. All right, so if you'll turn in your book or take a look at these pages if you don't have your book. All right, so here we go. Chapter 4, Small versus Big. The small states hated the Virginia Plan. The rule in the former Congress had always been one state, one vote. So all states, whether big or small, had equal power. But the Virginia Plan would change that. It based each state's number of representatives on population. The more people a state had, the more representatives it would send to Congress. Small states insisted they would never go along with this. They'd be swallowed up by big states such as Pennsylvania. Delegates from the small state of Delaware seemed ready to walk out at any minute. Big states were just as stubborn. It made sense for states with more people to have more representatives. Arguing went on for days. Then, a group of small states decided it was time to form a new plan of their own. Led by the hard-working William Paterson of New Jersey, they worked at night to create the New Jersey Plan. It called for a federation of states, not a strong national government. Congress would still have just one house, and each state would have an equal number of representatives. Sound familiar? It was. James Madison stood up and ripped apart Paterson's New Jersey Plan. It had the same problems as the Articles of Confederation, he said. Such a government had already failed Americans, and it would let them down again. The majority of the delegates agreed with Madison. The New Jersey Plan wouldn't work. On June 19th, it was voted down. That left only the Virginia Plan, the one that called for a new central government. Now it was clear the delegates weren't just improving the articles, they were creating a whole new constitution. In the history of the world, this had never happened. Wait, what? Huh? Say that again. They were creating a whole new constitution. In the history of the world, this had never happened. Men had never sat in a room to create a government from scratch. Could this grand experiment work? So now looking at this picture, I bet this is where they're recording the votes from the delegates when they're voting on the different plans. Just because the New Jersey Plan was voted down, that didn't mean the small states were giving in. They were still determined to have equal representation in Congress. Delegates from the big states tried everything to get the small states to change their minds. James Madison pointed out that the aim of the Virginia Plan was not to put the big states in charge. The goal was to give power to all the people. Governor Morris from Pennsylvania took a far-sighted approach. In the future, he said, people would think of themselves as Americans first, not as citizens of a state. The small states simply wouldn't budge, and neither would the big states. A lot of delegates were ready to sink the convention rather than give in. So I'm guessing this is James Madison again. It looks familiar, or his face looks like the face of a person we've seen in some of the other pictures. On the last Saturday of June, the delegates walked to the State House in sweltering heat. Buzzing bluebottle flies dive-bombed around their heads. That morning, the convention sank to its lowest point. Gunning Bedford from the small state of Delaware fumed, "I do not, gentlemen, trust you." He said that foreign powers, such as France, would be happy to help out the small states. Was Bedford hinting that soon there could be civil war in the United States? Rufus King of Massachusetts charged that the small states were acting vicious. He insisted he would never adopt an equality of votes. George Washington's face looked grim as he left the State House that day. The convention was held together by the strength of a hair, said Luther Martin of Maryland. Well, that's really interesting. Read that again. The convention was held together by the strength of a hair, said Luther Martin of Maryland. So not a whole lot holding things together. Fortunately, Sunday was a day off. On Monday, the delegates voted again on the Virginia Plan. Every man must have held his breath as the votes came in. The final tally, 5 states voted yay, 5 states voted nay, and 1 vote was a split vote. So it was a tie, a deadlock. Remember, New Hampshire delegates didn't arrive until July. What could be done now? The delegates didn't want to give up. They felt the eyes of the world were upon them. To save the convention, they chose a committee made up of 1 person from each state to try and solve the problem. 10 days later, after a break over the July 4th holiday, the committee reported back. They thought they had a solution. The House of Representatives would be based on population. That's what the big states wanted. The Senate, however, would have 2 members from each state. That pleased the small states, and it would take both houses to pass any laws. Called the Great Compromise, it was accepted by the delegates and written into the Constitution. A man named Roger Sherman from Connecticut was the brains behind it. Ever since then, it's dictated how Congress is set up. Today, there are still 2 senators from every state. The House of Representatives now has 435 members. California, the state with the most people, has 53 representatives. Wyoming, which is big in terms of land but has the smallest population, has only 1 representative. Today, we look at paintings of the framers of the Constitution dressed up in white powdered wigs, knee breeches, and buckled shoes. Because they all sort of looked alike, it's easy for us to assume they all thought alike. That was far from the truth. With such huge differences of opinion, it's astounding that they ever reached the Great Compromise.